All right, so I guess we should just talk about the thing we're going to talk about. But first, welcome back, Maxy, to Manga Mavericks.
Thank you for having me back. And after all the things I did before, I can't believe you forgave me.
I know, right? Apparently, what's the lore of Manga Mavericks? I killed you, you killed me, something like that. I don't know.
I think V-Lord killed us both, which...
I think so.
I mean, I must have done some sort of terrible crime to him and Sid where they, hunted me down and assassinated me. But it's fine, because I was going to be really clever there and say the name of the abilities in Takamagahara, and I've forgotten what they're called.
Oh, maybe they were just afraid you had more manga than them or whatever, because I know V-Lord and Sid have quite the collection.
Well, I've been clever, unlike them displaying it all willy-nilly everywhere. I've kept mine hidden away on digital platforms where they don't technically belong to me because you pay for a license.
Pretty much. Man, how much do you have on Comixology and Bookwalker? You have a shit ton of stuff at this point, don't you?
Okay, so yeah, Western Comics on Comixology. I have 1,054, 2 of which are what we're talking about today. That includes volumes and single issues, so the number is a little bit padded. On eBook Japan, which is where I get all of my Shonen Sunday stuff to talk with Bomber about, I have exactly 170 books.
Wow.
And on Bookwalker, the app's awful and won't load, so let's just say, I don't know, 80?
Yeah, man. I thought my collection was pretty huge, but yeah, I can't compete with you guys at all. I think the last time I counted, as far as physical books go, I think I have at least oh god, what was it, 300, 400? Something like that. It's in the hundreds, I can guarantee that.
It's still a lot.
I mean, yeah, I guess it's nothing to shake a stick at, but enough of waving our collections around, like the nerds we are. So, Maxy, I'm really excited to record with you today because I really enjoy getting to talk about canceled Jump comics with you, because I don't think we've done that since we talked about Hi-Fi Cluster, 2 years ago at this point.
I think it might have been longer, if we're being honest. But was that the first thing we ever recorded together?
Yeah, it was, because I had that recorded for another podcast I used to do at the time, and then that podcast pretty much stopped existing, so I just had this episode on my computer for a year or whatever, or close to it, and then when Manga Mavericks started around, and I think it was around the time, I re-listened to the episode last night, actually, just because I hadn't listened to it in a while, and it was around the time we talked about Toriko, and I accidentally deleted some of that Toriko podcast, which I still feel really terrible for. And we are gonna re-record that episode at some point. I just don't know when. Maybe this year. I don't know. I'd like to anyway. And then I was pretty much oh, I still have this thing with Maxy. Maybe people will like to listen to this. I'm sure people listen to that episode, but I don't know if they liked it or not. I don't really care because I really liked recording that episode. Because it was interesting for me because I had never read Hi-Fi Cluster up to that point. I had just kind of seen it around. So it was really interesting to actually read it for the first time and see how the story kind of went from there. But man, I kind of cringe at myself in that episode though, because I feel like because it was the first time I had a chance to talk to you, that I think I subconsciously just started throwing around hey, this guy knows about Jump. I'm gonna show him how much I know too. Look at me, I'm so cool.
Thing is, I always worry that if I talk to people that I have to show that I know a lot about Jump, which, don't get me wrong, listeners at home, I can rattle off trivia off the top of my head that you don't need to know, but it's also, it's really sort of awful to do all the time, just feel, haha, look at what I know. I know. It takes me about a week to read the magazine, nowadays. I'm not really as on it as I used to be back in the olden days. I've become withered and decayed. And it's also because I keep trying to read all these other magazines, but enough of that.
Yeah, so sometimes when I was re-listening to the episode, I was I kind of cringed at some points, but there were also points where I was man, this was a really good conversation. I hope we can do more stuff like this again, because I eventually want to cover all the completed canceled Jump manga that Viz has brought over. And I say completed, but that's also kind of hard because some of them are completed in the sense of, if you have Viz's old Shonen Jump issues, if you happen to have those on you, you can read them, but if you don't, you're kind of shit out of luck.
They've run 8 so far of these series. I think half, maybe 5 of them have all actually been collected in some form. There's the Barrage, Takamagahara, School Judgment, Cross Manage. Okay, so half of them, I think.
Okay, so that's not a bad number, but unfortunately there are still some that you would have to have a complete run. You'd have to have the complete magazine run to be able to actually read legally, which is a shame. Which was the case for Hi-Fi Cluster, but I guess as far as this series goes, what we're going to be talking about, you can actually buy both volumes of Takamagahara on Viz. That's how I read them anyway, which is good because I think as far as my subscription to Jump, I didn't get a subscription until like 2013 or so. So what was it? I think I have the issue with the last chapter because at the time I was reading it scanned because I didn't know any better back then. And I think the scans were late on the first chapter at the time, so the only way for me to be able to finish Takamagahara was to buy that issue with the last chapter. And then later on, I would find out, oh, they actually released this digitally. That's cool. They're definitely never going to do a print release of it, but, we take what we can get.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, digital's, synonymous enough with how manga gets released in English now that it's not the end of the world to be stuck with it digital only.
Pretty much. But yeah, so I guess we could just kind of get right into it. We are going to be talking about Takamagahara by Juzo Kawai, which did get a release in Viz's Weekly Shonen Jump. And let's see here. So Takamagahara ran from July 9th to November 5th, 2012. And it ran for about 17 chapters. So yeah, if you couldn't tell, it definitely got canned. And so Takamagahara is essentially about this high schooler who he comes from a family of fighters, and he's basically the only non-fighter in the family because all he wants to do is just draw manga and take over Weekly Shonen Jump, which, considering the fact that this series was canceled, just makes that all the more ironic. Oh, that's really sad in a way. But yeah, I think his eldest brother is the world's best MMA fighter, and I think near the end of the series he becomes the strongest fighter in the world or some shit. I don't remember. And then his youngest brother is a third grader who can beat up all the really tough junior high kids and stuff, which is pretty great.
Yeah, he's literally taken over his school.
And that's kind of cute. But, like I said, he's the only non-fighter in the family. He just wants to draw manga. So he has this whole thing where, he essentially, when it comes down to him, having to defend himself from a bunch of bullies, he doesn't want to use his right hand to hit anybody because he wants to make sure he uses it for manga. He doesn't want to break his arm. He has to draw with that hand. But he ends up gaining these powers, which we come to find out are called kamiwaza, which there's a whole mythology to this series that I honestly kind of goes over my head, that kind of explains, why they're called that. But, the series essentially, it leads up to our main character, who I totally forget his name.
Yamato Yamada.
Yeah. Yamato Yamada, who he's essentially recruited to go to a school called Takamagahara and basically attend with these other two students to basically learn how to use his powers. At first it seems like he gets recruited to kind of learn how to use his powers, but also what was it? Basically help unify the one of the many school buildings because the teacher doesn't feel like dealing with it or whatever. It kind of goes back and forth with its narrative a bit, because sometimes the narrative will focus on one thing and just kind of go to another. I don't know. I felt like it was a little unfocused in some parts, personally. I don't know how you feel, Maxy.
I'm actually probably a little more positive than that, but I do feel like Kawai kind of jumps between different ideas very sort of erratically, trying to get everything out before the series ends.
Yeah, which is like that was something we kind of had to deal with Hi-Fi Cluster too, where it's like, this person clearly wants to give the series time to kind of breathe and let you get to know the characters, but then it's like, we're getting canceled soon, so you should probably wrap up your story. Okay, here's all the cool stuff that I would have gotten to done if I had more time to let things flesh out, a bit, but nope, unfortunately, that's just not the case. So I guess that's essentially the plot, or at least as far as I can remember, which is a shame because like I have I did a Twitter thread on this, but like as I was reading, it was like I didn't really have much to. This is probably a bad thing to say because it's like why do a podcast about something, but like I feel like I don't have like a ton to say about Takamagahara. I feel the same way about Takamagahara that I felt about Hi-Fi Cluster, where it's like, oh, this series has some neat ideas, but it doesn't have nearly enough time to really, like, explore or show them off, unfortunately, and it just kind of leads to a very underwhelming, unsatisfying, at least a story, as far as the story goes, anyway.
Yeah, I don't think that's entirely unfair. I'd say the things that really help it and kind of give me a lot of things to think about is, I said before, the stuff surrounding the existence of the series, but also, like, where it lifts the ideas from, for one part. For example, Takamagahara is quite literally the plane of high heaven in Japanese mythology. Like it's a real part of Japanese spirituality, as is the name given to Yamato's special ability, which is the Ama no Ukihashi, the floating bridge of heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of stuff's really interesting to kind of go into and see. So, oh, he's thought through the things that are in the series, even if he's not giving them time to actually mean anything. And also the arts. When I read this like 5 years ago or whatnot, the first time, like I thought the art was kind of crap, but every time I come back to it, it's surprisingly great. Like it uses almost no screen tones whatsoever throughout its entire run. It is like truly just like a black and white manga. And I think that it lends itself well to when it's doing like crazy martial arts action and stuff. It's just got a sort of nice scrappy feeling to it.
Yeah, I'm very mixed about the art because when I was going through the first chapter, like there are 3 double-page spreads within the first chapter, 2 of which I don't think really need to be spreads. Because I think the first spread is just basically showing off all the brothers, and Yamato in the middle as kind of like a reveal of like, because before then, we were kind of introduced to the brothers and all the crazy stuff that they're able to do as far as their combat abilities go, and then there's like this big spread that reveals like, oh, Yamato is a manga artist, and they're all surprised by that, and it's just like stuff like that really makes me wonder, like, did this really need to be a spread? Like, I guess you want to like kind of show off all the brothers, and it's kind of, I guess that's kind of interesting, show them all in one place, but it's like, I don't know, just like decisions like that I don't know. I personally don't know if I really felt like they were necessary, but I'm also not an artist, so well, I don't know.
I will agree with you. The double page spreads they're really weird, and they do stick out in how frequent they are. Because like in a first chapter, you expect a bunch because they're filling out 50 pages. But then as it goes on, like week on week, like most chapters will have at least one double page spread, and it won't necessarily be needed. And it is this really odd thing. Some of them are really cool. But then, you will just get ones where it's literally just something that would have normally been a smaller panel on a page, and he's just kind of stretched out and blown it up.
Or even like maybe a 1-page spread, like just a giant page maybe would have sufficed possibly. Like there's a whole spread of around the point in the first chapter where Yamada and his eldest brother are kind of talking to each other, and his eldest brother is like, oh well, if you're not going to fight, then you better take over the manga world or whatever, and they kind of fist bump, and it's kind of cute, but it's like, does that really need a spread? I mean, it's a nice little sincere moment, but it's like, you could have maybe like used 1 page for that, honestly. But that, I don't, maybe that's a nitpick on my part. I'm not sure.
Well, I think especially because the whole manga plot, whilst it does lead to like, I don't know, it's a decent enough character motivation. It leads to some decent little comedy moments. But to give a whole double-page spread to the eldest brother Musashi just being like, yeah, you do what you want. I believe in you, you know, we're brothers. And then the plot is dropped almost immediately. And it's just like, well, this was a waste of everybody's time.
But the very last double-page spread in the first chapter is really cool because it's basically Yamato fighting against the giant Yankee guy who, you know, he ends up becoming his follower, which is kind of funny. You know, I really like that spread because it really just does a great job of just showing the impact of Yamato's punch. Like these are the kind of things, or I guess the kinds of moments I would expect to be given double page spreads.
Yeah, well, to me, the action's completely amazing. Like, you get the encounter with the first villain, the businessman bully with the blades. It's a really good way of showing off that, like, Jizo Kawai can just do insane physicality. Like, there's a double-page spread that, again, probably wasted, but it just shows, like, ripples going across Blade's face before he, like, gets flung into a building. And it looks like the sort of thing you'd see in a way more accomplished action series like Baki or something.
Yeah, I really couldn't help but feel like Kawai is probably a fan of Baki because it just, like, the businessman bully guy, whatever his name was, I don't remember. There's so many expressions he makes that, like, just belong in Baki the Grappler.
Like, 100%.
And I think I tweeted about this too. What really surprised me was that it's actually not even a double-page spread. It's weird. Or maybe it's like... Maybe I'm not sure, because I guess like when I was going through it on my phone here, reading on my phone, at least as far as it's presented on the mobile app, like it's actually not even a spread. Like it's literally just a page of Yamato's fist like zooming by, and then on the next page is when you see the hit actually make contact with his face, which I thought was kind of interesting. That you just kind of have this page to kind of like take in the speed of the punch, and then literally when you turn the page, it's like, oh, this is the impact of the punch, which I think just makes it even funnier.
I think, like, which is great. Like it's exciting and goofy and interesting all at the same time, and it does things like that. And like the second encounter with another sort of heavenly power wielder is in the hospital with this relative of the owner of the hospital who sucks up people's blood to bulk himself up. And like it's really intimidating. It looks really cool as a power goes, like to turn into this sort of giant, hulking, freakish, massive muscle that like reminds me of like a titan or something. And like he fills up the panels, he fills up the hallways and everything. Like it's a really good sense of scale. And then he's taken out by this uppercut that both looks cool, but is also so ridiculously goofy in how it plays out. Like it's almost like a sort of a spiral uppercut that ends with the guy's head in the ceiling and his mouth just drooped down. That it's like, it comes off, you can't tell whether it's trying to be cool or whether it's just trying to be really sort of funny and stupid.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm so mixed on Takamagahara just overall in that, like, there are some really cool moments in there, and you know, they're like some of the action is really nice and even really comedic, but like, God, I feel like overall it's just, I don't know, like there are very few aspects about the series that make it very memorable for me. Like it's probably one of the more forgettable series I've ever read in my time reading comics, honestly, which I don't even want to say because it sounds really harsh, but like, I don't know, because like even when I read this while it was running weekly, I couldn't help but feel like, yeah, some of this is kind of cool, but it's like it's just not really doing anything for me.
I don't think it left a huge impact on me till I went back to read it like a second or third time, where it endeared itself enough to me. But at the same time, I'm aware that I'm probably like more and more positive as time goes on because I'm really scared of its letterer beating me up for saying anything nasty about it.
Yeah, I forgot to mention Annalise Chrisman, who we've had on the show before, actually did the lettering for this series, which I don't want to make it sound like Annalise's work is, like super easy or anything, because it's not. Like we've had her on the show to talk about the lettering she does for Black Clover and how hellish that could be sometimes. But I imagine some of the workload wasn't entirely hellish on her because, if you buy both volumes 1 and 2 of Takamagahara on Viz through their digital platform, I think probably because it didn't get a print release, and it's probably not going to anytime soon, that you could tell like they didn't really bother to like actually, because like when obviously if you buy in a Viz manga, you could tell that like they really go out of the way to like change the Japanese sound effects to like English sound effects, which isn't something they did for the digital edition.
Yeah, it's something they usually leave in a weekly magazine. They won't redo the sound effects. Then when it comes to the volumes, they redo them. And in this, the sound effects are 100% untouched with just smaller bits of text to get across what they're going for. And it does seem like that would make for an easier workload, for sure. But also, I think the actual sound effects as they are in the original Japanese are really good. Like, a lot of them are sort of nice and scratchy, but say the stuff for Blade, like his sound effects are made out of the segmented blades that come out of his body, which is a really nice touch.
Yeah, I like that detail a lot too. There's a point during that fight too. I think it's during like the final blow Yamato gives him, where the sound effect kind of like frames that final panel. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but I really like that touch.
I thought it was really good. Outside of these sort of nice bits of the art as well, I've got to say, character-wise, I feel like both something I enjoyed and something that was definitely a mistake is the characters who turn up later on, the other two power users, Kumaso and the Pompadour gun guy.
Izumo.
Yeah, like, they're really interesting characters that clearly there was a lot of things Juzo Kawai was thinking of doing with them. I mean, there's a whole point with the animal gun guy. Say his name again?
Izumo.
Izumo, thank you. I'm so bad at this. So yeah, the whole thing with Izumo where he's like, towards the end of the story, he's like, I best report this back to some mysterious people who you'll never get to find out about because
I know.
we're doing a time skip for the final chapter, which is just the balls on that to be like, yeah, he didn't even need to do that. He could have just left it as, oh no, he's actually just a nice guy. And when it goes to that final chapter, he's clearly still in the team and working together with them. It's just this one little line that completely pulls you out and goes like, oh, there was a plan here that we're never going to know.
I know. And it's even more confusing when, like, and I think he might have made mention about this too, but there is a page, near the end of volume 2 that kind of helps, I guess, kind of clear up the air as far as, like, some of the motivations of Izumo and Kumaso, where you have where you have Izumo visiting, I guess, a sick friend, a sick family member. I don't know, somebody who's sick, who's and he mentions how he's looking for a cure for this person's sickness, but we don't know who this person is, but apparently that was his motivation. And how Kumaso, who it's kind of mentioned here and there, but like he kind of has this gimmick where like, at first you think, oh, his sword talks, that's kind of funny, but then you find out, oh no, that's his ventriloquism act, which I think is a neat quirk.
At the same time, I have to say, ventriloquism doesn't really work if the thing you're making talk can't mimic the action of talking. Just holding up a sword and throwing your voice just makes you look weird. Like that's such a bizarre thing where he's clearly had this goofy gimmick idea, but not thought about how it absolutely 100% does not work.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
But I do like that. It's like you're saying, it turns out his whole thing is that he knows ventriloquism to please his master, who's like a small girl who doesn't leave the house.
Yeah, and there's a little section of the Omake page where you can see Kumaso holding up a teddy bear and, playing with the master at the house, who is a little girl, making it talk and everything, which I thought was really cute. But I guess while we're on the topic of the characters, I really feel like at the end of the day, the characters are probably the weakest part of Takamagahara. Because honestly, outside of Kumaso and Izumo, I feel like the rest of the cast isn't nearly as memorable, unfortunately.
Yeah, like, as funny as it is to kind of do the whole thing where the pompadour then shaves himself bald guy, Fukion, like, makes the whole thing of being, oh, you've beaten me, I'm now going to, like, be part of the Yamato Yamada shogunate. And that, like, as much as that's, like, a really nice, goofy, funny setup, the problem then comes that he's not very interesting, and the rest of his goons have no personality whatsoever.
Pretty much.
Which is a real misfire. And the love interest...
Oh, yeah.
She's alright. Is it Minaho?
Mizuho.
Mizuho, thank you. I was close. I'm getting better. There we go. Mizuho. I feel like there was some potential there that wasn't really delivered on at all, and then we get the sort of the final twist of a power that's interesting, which is a yin-yang power where she can make things be opposites, starting with her own gender, which is like, that's interesting. That at least makes for a nice sort of playful gimmick, because it's not that she's necessarily androgynous, but she looks very genderless.
Mm-hmm.
Which are important distinctions between the two things there. So, like, having the switch over be with a character like her, I think that's neat, but it's ultimately used to just make her into a damsel in distress for the final chapter. So
yeah, which is disappointing, because her whole thing was like she was Yamato's childhood friend, and she has this whole thing where, like, she constantly comes over and tries to challenge Yamato to a fight, and she wants to become stronger and all that, which I think could have made for an interesting, like, female character.
Well, I mean, imagine, if you will, Colton, for the final chapter, if instead of Yamato turning up and beating everyone down, he used his power, which has been revealed now at that point in the story, that his power is actually to enhance the abilities of himself and others. Like, he can raise someone else's defense or attack as need be as well. So imagine if instead he powered her up and she got to actually be strong for once. That would have been really sort of neat and, like, fulfilled a character's entire arc there.
But I feel like somebody could also make the argument that, but it's not really her strength, so it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I guess there could be that. Although you could make a nice sweet point about it being their love for each other or something. I don't know, I'm not a fucking writer.
All joking aside, I think that, like, that's a neat idea, and I think it could lead to some cute moments and some interesting character stuff there. But yeah, I do agree that, like, you have this, at least an idea for I think a decent, strong female character who maybe could have, I think, he could have been good, but by the end, the series is so rushed, and it's like, oh, we got to get all our ideas out there. We got to show them we got to show them what they're not going to get, and it's like, okay, I guess she's a damsel in distress now. Whatever, I don't know. It's just, it's certainly not like. I don't know. I'm not as upset about it as I sound like I am, because, like, I wasn't very invested in her character in the first place. But, like, I could see people taking issue with that. But I don't know. Again, we have so little time to become invested in the characters that, like, when something happens to them, it doesn't really affect me much at all, unfortunately.
Well, this is the thing. Like, I like this comic way more than I should, and even I can't say that I'm, like, that het up about anything.
I know it's so hard, because it's like, it's not the worst thing I've ever read, but it's like, there's so much potential there, and it's a lot of wasted potential, which just kind of hurts, honestly.
What is the worst thing you've read?
Oh, see, that's a loaded question.
Fall into my trap.
See, anything I would deem the worst, I can guarantee I didn't get any farther than, like, a volume, if even that. I like things that I really think are actually bad, I drop pretty quickly, so it's like,
I'm the same, so it's really hard to say, isn't it?
I know. I'd have to really reach back. Yeah, thanks a lot, Maxy. But yeah, no, it's not the worst thing I've read, but man, just like, that's what I hate about the series, is that, like, they're at least, it's not even like I say there are neat ideas in this comic, but like there aren't even really that many of them to me. I think what drew me to this series when it first came out was, oh look, this series could be the vehicle for a lot of really cool, neat, weird powers. But then, I mean, nowadays we have stuff like My Hero Academia for that kind of thing. And even as far as like all the neat powers go, there's not even really a lot of them, honestly. Like, I think what was it? The most interesting power to me by far, and I think is probably going to be everyone's most interested power, would be Izumo's ability to turn animals into guns.
just
like I've never seen something like that anywhere. Like that's honestly probably the best part about Takamagahara, and is probably going to be the most memorable thing about it.
I like that so many of the powers are so specific that literally you could have a power and just not know, because, for example, you may have just not tried picking up a flying squirrel in your life and turning it into a gun. Like, the whole idea of these being like hidden powers in the sort of the entire world totally holds true when they're all obscure to the point where that some of them would be considered a stretch for a stand in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, you know?
I know. Actually, oh god, I guess that could be a stand, couldn't it? I didn't even think about that. That's actually really interesting. But yeah, no, it's just, yeah, I'm basically caught in the middle here where it's like, I feel like there are really cool, interesting powers, but again, we don't even really, at least in my opinion, we don't get to see too many of them. Like, I think Izumo's beast to gun ability, and then I think there's a guy who could turn into a Komodo dragon. I think the Animorphs are like probably the most interesting power to me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It helps that Kwai's pretty good at drawing like lizard people.
Oh yeah, like he's really good at drawing reptiles. If the Komodo dragon power and the snake power at the very end are any indication. Like, I think as disappointing as the ending to the series is, I thought that was one of the better parts about the ending is Yamato literally fighting against a guy who can make a fist out of snakes. Like, that's like TM my shit.
It's pretty goddamn cool, to be honest. And again, it ties itself in nicely to Japanese mythology, because the snake dude's his power is the Yamato no Orochi. Just like the 100-headed snake or whatnot. So like, just again, it's way smarter than it ever actually gets to tell you, which is kind of tragic for the whole comic. Like, it's not that it necessarily could have been good if it continued, but it's that it could have been good in the time it had if it really, I don't know, neatened itself up a little.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like, I really feel like the second volume is where it starts to pick up, because not that I thought the first volume was bad, but like, I just wasn't, I don't know, aside from a few cool moments, like, I wasn't wholly interested in the first arc, honestly, I guess if you want to call it that.
Being set in the real world and having the same setup for those like first two encounters really be, this person has a power and they're dangerous, I best deal with them. It wasn't the most thrilling thing in the world. And something kind of neat with the volumes is they do make a point of saying with the titles of them that they are delineated between the Ashihara arc, I think that was it, which is all the stuff set in the real world, and then I've forgotten the name of the comic
the Takamagahara arc.
The Takamagahara arc. That was a weird mental blank there. I talk faster than my brain goes. It's not a good way to exist. But that's kind of neat, because in a lot of ways it means you could even tell people, skip that first volume, you don't massively need it, and just hop into the second one for a nice sort of short series about fighting in a strange, massive school.
Yeah, because I feel like this could have been a really cool, like, Yankee delinquent manga too, if it so felt like going that direction.
There's so many things it could have been if only it actually did any of them.
And isn't that the worst thing about some of these canceled series is, man, if only it just had a little more time or had a little more foresight to like use the time it had to execute its ideas so much better.
I think in a lot of ways this suffered for being Juzo Kawaii's first series as well, and it was quite a troubled thing, so I have to wonder how much of it was like him going week to week, oh god, I'm not going to finish this chapter, I'd best start planning the next thing in case they don't like this or whatever. Like, it reads like it was made by someone who was very overwhelmed by trying to actually make a comic. So this apparently had, according to the author at least, so pinch of salt, but it had one of the most sort of troubled staff shortages of any series in Shonen Jump's history.
Wow.
To the point where most weeks there would be other published authors or any staff members that could be found, like, coming in and just helping finish the chapters and get them out. Like he says, he couldn't credit them all on that final page, so he only did ones who came in, like, more than twice.
Wow.
Which is insanity. And some of these are, like, pretty notable names, and so it's really interesting. I'll give you a nice little bit of assistant corner here as I lead you through a few of the people that went through this, because one of them will be interesting, although I don't know how much you'll be knowing anything about it, but roll with me here. So the first is Keisuke Goto, who currently does a series called Her Skin Does Not Forget, which is like this adult romance thing, like with a sort of a mystery vibe behind it all, which is like, that's not what you would think someone who's also helped work on this would do. But you also had one of the people published. Do you remember before Jump Plus, there was Jump Live, a sort of mobile phone manga service that continued Rookie Policewoman Kyoko-san and a couple of other things.
I think I do remember that, yeah.
Yeah, so they had one author from that, Manabu Yashiro, who's not really appeared since Jump Live, but like still, someone who was clearly coming up at the same time as Kawaii. And then Kenta Tsuchida, who people who have tended to read manga through other means may know for the series Lock On, that was a cancelled Jump series from 2009 about a pervert who likes taking photos of girls. And he has to wear an eye patch because he has a very typical middle school syndrome power. So he has to keep his eye covered, else he'll use it without wanting to and he'll get tired. But it's just a photographic memory. And that author's actually had some success since doing My Animal for Jump Plus. But the really interesting one is one of the assistants, one of the most noted ones on it, who apparently can like just draw stuff incredibly quickly, is Kentaro Hidano, who would be known for anybody reading Weekly Shonen Jump right now for having just launched their debut series, Ziga, which is Godzilla, but what if not called Godzilla?
Oh, wow. Huh. Interesting.
So, like, there's like a murderer's row of noteworthy talent who had to step in and actually help this comic come out for the 17 weeks that it did. And you just have to think, like, how much of a mess must things have been behind the scenes between the comic being so shaky and all over the place and having to have so many people come in. Like, it seems like it might have just been a very strange train wreck in a lot of ways. And I don't think Juzo Kawai would say anything to the contrary because they've not done any work since.
Yeah, that's a real shame because, as mixed as I am on Takamagahara, and as I guess as much of a, I hate to say it, but as much of a crapshoot as the series became, unfortunately,
yeah,
I would like to see Kawai come back for more work.
It would be nice. Like, there was so much potential. I mean, just to the art alone, or even the ideas they were showing. And it's not that it's all for nothing. There's a 2-volume series out there. It's available in multiple countries, and, people do like it.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems a shame that one big failure will be all they're really known for. Yeah,
so I hope Kawai can come back for more work in the future. I don't know. It seems like a shame because it seems like, again, Takamagahara did have at least some potential, and so I'd be interested in what other ideas they could come up with.
Well, I mean, we've talked about it outside of the show, but like, it's not like the author's without his accolades as well. He is actually an award winner for Takamagahara, which is kind of bizarre in its own way, especially because the site that gave it to them was Comics Alliance, which was, for its time, a very big comics site that, through various sales and awkwardness between AOL and other companies, is now defunct. But it got a Stephanie Brown Memorial Award for being the cruelest cancellation, which, yeah, sure, why not? I mean, really, its competition would have been Barrage, and whilst I know people do like Barrage, I don't, and I'm right, so...
Maxy, we are going to do an episode on Barrage at some point, because, man...
We have to do an episode on Barrage, because I'm not a person who really dunks on series much, but I would say that Barrage is probably the... Not the worst, because Red Sprite exists, but it's one of the worst full series that have been published by Weekly Shonen Jump. It's just, it's so sloppy, which is crazy, because I like everything else that Kohei Horikoshi's done, but not that. But anyway, this award was given by one of the members of staff on Comics Alliance, David Brothers, who just last year has become an editor for Viz Media, who do Weekly Shonen Jump. He was doing the editing on Noah's Notes when that had its Jump Start run a few weeks ago. So that's like one of these sort of crazy wheels within wheels things that I find really interesting about the sort of the nature of comics journalism and publishing and how it all ends up interweaving eventually in the West.
Yeah, that's really interesting how things just kind of work out that way. Oh man, yeah. Sorry. Now I'm just thinking about how much I want to talk about Barrage at some point, because man, that was something I remember I was reading weekly at that point too, because like I was already a fan of Horikoshi at that point, because like I love Omagadoki Zoo, which is like his first like full work in Jump, which is something I also really, if we're gonna talk about Barrage, I want to talk about Omagadoki Zoo, even if it's not licensed. I want to talk about it so bad.
Oh, no, I'm absolutely willing to talk about it. I mean, if I need to kind of revisit any of it, it's not like the volumes aren't available digitally, so I can like grab it in Japanese and flick through, and then have minor regrets, but still have a good time. Because that comic is fantastic, but the character designs are very busy.
I can agree with that.
Which... It's not the worst thing, and I mean, it means you get this sort of really great main character with the rabbit dude who's just like almost looks like a patchwork man. The amount of layers he's got on and stuff, like there's a scarf and a hat and a jacket and all sorts, which is a bit much, but I do like it. But then you get other characters where it's just doesn't sit well with me. But still, a good comic, and I mean, it had like a 5-volume run. That's a decent debut.
Yeah, it ran for like close to 40 chapters.
Yeah.
So yeah, it clearly was doing well at some point, I guess, but I don't know. That Omagadoki Zoo is really interesting to say the least. It is definitely probably one of my favorite comics, actually.
It's definitely one where there's a lot to say about it, which, I mean, let's be honest, is probably more than either of us could have said for Takamagahara before we started doing this episode.
I know that was something I think I was telling off mic was, or I guess did I forget what was off mic and what was not, but you know, this? I don't, like an hour? I don't know.
That's not too bad. But it's been a long episode.
But no, that was something I was kind of afraid of going in. Was I like revisiting this series again after so long and kind of seeing how I guess maybe how I feel about it compared to back in 2012 when I was actually reading this weekly. But I think that's the problem, is that my feelings, I don't think, have really changed. I think I appreciate some aspects of it a little bit more, or maybe like some aspects maybe about the same, I guess. I don't know. But I guess that was something I was afraid of was, man, I don't think we really have like a ton to say about this other than it's a shame. Like, I know we talked a lot about, like, the last time we talked about any kind of canceled Jump comic when we talked about, like, Hi-Fi Cluster, I know we kind of had our grievances with how that story was handled. But I think if we had to compare the two, I think Hi-Fi Cluster might have been handled just a tiny bit better, comparatively speaking.
I feel like I liked Takamagahara more.
Really?
Yeah. I feel like as much as it didn't execute pretty much any of its ideas as well as I wanted it to, I really admire that there were all these ideas. And Hi-Fi Cluster, it gives a really good effort, and I think it does a very well told story right up until the point where you realise that the author's been told it's being cancelled and it all starts falling apart.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so like I feel like it's a choice between, do you want a really well told story that just doesn't really manage to present the ideas it wants, or do you want an incredibly scrappily told story that throws every idea at the wall, doesn't explain them, and stops?
Yeah, because I feel like the difference with Hi-Fi Cluster is that, yeah, there is a clear point where you could tell all of these story beats and plot points that would have been saved for a longer run. You know, the fact that they come into the story so soon is a clear like red flag that, okay, this thing is going to end soon. Whereas Takamagahara, I guess for me it's like how soon these ideas are brought up. Whereas Hi-Fi Cluster, I think, at least tried to have some sort of resolution, which I appreciate. Whereas Takamagahara is literally like, okay, so here's the bulk of the story we would have told, and here are the ideas we would have maybe gone with, and here's the central conflict, but we don't have time. We don't even have time to like really resolute anything. It's so interesting to me because it literally throws all of its ideas for what it maybe wanted to do if it had a longer run in that last chapter. Like, oh, here are these zombie things that want to get a hold of this chick's power to bring the dead back or whatever. And there's this one woman who's leading the zombies, I guess. Oh, curse you guys! I'm foiled again. I don't know. It's
really bizarre as well, like, specifically with that stuff, because if it weren't any other author, you'd get the impression that like so many ideas that only come up at the end, stuff like the yin yang power, like the Yomi, these things where karma has taken over the power havers and they become these sort of weird white uniformed guys. Like that stuff that if I hadn't have got to that in the 17 weeks the series have been around, I would have saved it for another series.
Yeah, exactly, right?
But like I don't know if stuff was that tumultuous that like Juzo Kawaii was just like, I know I'm not getting another series. Like, and just kind of threw it all out there, which is morbid, but it's the only way I can think of to explain how someone could literally just kind of just spur everything against the wall that like hadn't managed to happen in it yet. Because half of it wasn't even alluded to in the rest of the comic.
Pretty much, yeah. Oh man, yeah. I think that was the thing that like really got me the most was, oh yeah, look at all this stuff we could have done. Oh, we're over. It's over. Bye guys.
That can often be one of the worst things about Jump comics in general. I think I've talked about it on another episode of Manga Mavericks in the past, probably the Hi-Fi Cluster one actually. But the King Crimson effect, which is named after the JoJo ability. Like, of where a comic in its last couple of chapters, or usually the very last chapter, will go and say, hey, I know what story was happening last week, but now it's like 10 years in the future, look where they've all ended up. And like, you don't recognize anything that's happened. It's like, hey, this is what you could have had. Which is frustrating, at least.
I don't even think that much time passes as far as Takamagahara's time skip goes, because it seems like all the characters are like, at least most of like the school age characters are still in like school at least, or at least yeah.
It all looks exactly the same. It doesn't seem like much time has passed, but it treats it like Yamato and his teammates have had like some sort of massive journey at the school taking it over.
I guess so.
Clearly to the point that they've not just taken over school, but like they've dealt all the way up to level of principal, because their jackets are like say Takamagahara on it instead of just the name of the school that he was a part of at that larger school. But like it doesn't give you much to go on. It's all just intimated through like the bits and pieces you see.
Oh yeah, and I guess the other power I thought was interesting. I can't believe I forgot to mention this. I thought the video game power was really cool.
Oh yeah, no, it's crazy that we've not actually mentioned this, considering it's like probably the most significant fight in the whole comic. But yeah, so when Yamato and everyone end up going to the school, they have to go and deal with the main student who's like taking the place over. And it seems like this one guy who's always quiet has like his underling talk for them. But it turns out he's actually being controlled by the underling, who has like bruises in the shape of a game controller on his left arm that he's just been using to control this giant hulking dude. And like that, I thought was a really interesting power, and they alluded to it well by having it be like, oh, his habit is tapping, and like he does it on the desk, and you can see through like the finger movements, it's like how someone would play an arcade stick, which is a weird thing to spot as foreshadowing, because otherwise you would just think, oh, it's tapping, but it's very situated, and even when it's on his arm, but it still works as a really interesting twist, and then the actual way the power works and how, despite him being like the villain of that storyline, it's actually kind of ended up being a teaching moment where it's taught empathy to the bully that he's been controlling all this time.
Oh, yeah. And I thought that little part of the story, as far as like all of the, I guess the misdirection goes, and I guess some of the foreshadowing I thought was done fairly well, you know, because there's a lot of hints in there as to like what this dude's power actually is. Because, you know, at first, you know, they start talking about like all the really lame kamiwaza powers that people have, where it's like, oh, your nose hair can grow, or hey, I could turn my rice blue, which is like, those are some very specific, very useless powers that I enjoy. Where it's like, oh, this guy can like give himself another one-up in a video game. I guess that'd be useful for video games, so it's not useful for much else. So I find that kind of interesting, because it's like, it's not like he didn't completely lie about his powers. His powers do have to do with video games, but I like that his powers were a little more extensive than that. I kind of like that he ended up being kind of the big bad, like, oh, it was the little guy the whole time, controlling the big guy. And even like the bigger guy powers, which I find it funny that his name is Taiju, because all I could think about was Dr. Stone.
Right?
I thought his powers were really interesting in that, you know, he could mess with sound. And I really like some of the bits where it's like, you know, Yamato is just being attacked by like just this like clusterfuck of sound, which I thought was actually pretty visually interesting.
Like we were talking about lettering earlier, and how like and how they didn't replace it with like English done lettering, and I think that power was probably a big part of that decision, because like the whole explosion of sound effects like being blasted through Yamato looks really cool.
I cannot imagine what Annalise would have to go through in order to completely just erase all of that and just redraw all of those to match English. Like, I can't even imagine working on those parts of the story.
Oh, it would have been a nightmare, like, no doubt.
So I guess in this sense, Annalise dodged a bullet there.
Yeah. I mean, not that we should keep talking about it like she was somehow put out by the series, because again, like, from talking with Annalise before, like, she's fond of it, and I agree, it's a good comic. So, yay! Don't hate us for the bad things we've said about it.
But I think that was probably some of the most, like, I guess that part of the story was probably the most interesting, in that, like, there were allusions to certain things made, like, you know, Izumo and the kid, I forget his name, I'm sorry. Emishi, yeah, that's right. They have this moment where it's like, you know, where he's like, hey, can I punch one of you guys to see how strong I am? And Izumo's like, okay, fine, hit me, and he hits him or whatever. And that ends up playing into his powers, because the whole thing with his powers is that he can control anybody he's hit. And then when you realize, oh yeah, he hit Izumo, so he can technically control him too. Like, I like little things like that. I thought that was kind of cool.
It's really well integrated as like this character moment, because Izumo like throws himself backwards to make it look like the punch was stronger than it was. So it kind of really drives home that sort of, that nice but almost unsettling kindness he has towards everyone, because you get the feeling he's up to something, even though they never really do anything with that. But like, it's a nice sweet moment still, and I feel like, again, it just comes down to the potential this comic could have had if it did anything with any of the stuff.
Man, you know, I think it really says something about Takamagahara, where like, even with all of its faults and you know, the untapped potential that a lot of these ideas have, that Izumo is still probably, I'm going to say probably the best thing about this series.
Oh yeah, I mean, even if it weren't for like what characterization we get, like, he's got a really like good, unique design that seems really atypical for what you get in a lot of Jump manga.
And, you know, obviously his powers are very interesting, and overall he just seems like a very, he's such a cool guy. Like, you almost kind of want to hang out with him almost.
Yeah, which I think is really successful. I don't think they have the same success with Kasumo. who I feel like I'm saying his name differently every single time, but we'll roll with that. Who I feel like they spend a lot of time with, but they don't make him that much more interesting than the sort of basic level of, hey, he's got a neat power set and here's this funny gimmick.
Yeah, he doesn't have much of a personality outside of stoic badass, which, everybody likes that character type.
Yeah, well, it's the one that tends to do well with the younger readers. I mean, just look at Sasuke.
Or I was gonna say Bakugo, but he's actually an interesting character, so I guess that maybe that doesn't work.
Well, I don't think stoic would be the word for him. I mean, stoic.
Oh no, Todoroki. Todoroki's
yeah,
a better
I was going to say that a
example.
bit more. Yeah, I mean, they make him interesting, but it takes a sports festival to do it. Mate, that's what Takamagahara needed. If Takamagahara had a sports festival...
Oh my god, that would be amazing!
Yeah, I said it as a joke, and as I was finishing the sentence, I was like, actually, I really wish that it had done that. Again, which it comes down to, there's so much they could have done with this, and the whole school setting of Takamagahara, which is a mountain made up of other schools, is like, there's room for that sort of stuff, and it just didn't do any of it. I
know, and I think there's a point in the near the end where it's like, okay, we fought this guy. Oh, but there's obviously you got to fight the obligatory big four of whatever, and then complete your quest or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, we're not going to ever get to any of that. But no, yeah, man, I really hate that this discussion has just devolved into us coming up with better ideas for Takamagahara that we'll never see.
It's kind of sad in its way, but at the same time, you have to this is where you have to give it some credit. We were clearly winding down this review of it, and yet we somehow got pulled back into talking about it. So it clearly had so much potential, which is kind of the sad thing. But I mean, I'm glad I read it. I think I bought it at full price on Comixology. So, I mean, I spent £10 to read 400 pages of a comic that could have been better, but, had something I enjoyed. That'll do, really.
Yeah, I guess I think over on my side, I paid close to $14 to read all of Takamagahara, which I'm not upset at that price. I'm fine with that, because it's
yeah, I mean, what could you buy for $14? Just a nice pizza?
Yeah, you could get a pizza for that price, and yeah. If I had to choose between 2 volumes of manga and pizza, I don't know. I like both. I like manga and pizza. So
if you could eat Takamagahara, it would be ideal.
See, I don't know. I don't know if I like Takamagahara enough to eat it, but man, this conversation's gotten really weird.
Sorry, I do this. I do this a lot.
No, I love it. I'm having a great time. So I guess it comes down to, I don't know. Would you recommend Takamagahara to people though, just in general? Because I feel like I wouldn't. I don't know, or at the very least, I would be hesitant about it.
It would have to come with caveats. I would absolutely recommend it to people, but it would have to be the right sort of person to read it. Not to say that there's really wrong sorts of people, but
I guess people that you would know, sure, maybe they'll get kind of hung up on the fact that it doesn't really have an ending to its story, and it doesn't have the time to resolve anything almost, but or act on its ideas to its full extent, but I guess I would recommend it to somebody who I would know would still get something out of the ideas it's presenting, at least, just to somebody who's looking for something short to read, because I think that's something Takamagahara actually has to its advantage as far as manga fans over here in the US and really outside of Japan, people who are maybe kind of burnt out on longer running stuff, or people who are intimidated on at the idea of starting to even buying or even really reading long running stuff, not even buying them. And people who are just intimidated by long running stuff in general, because I've heard that, obviously, I guess it goes without saying that shorter lived stuff, I think, has a better chance of doing better just because, people like short stuff.
Yeah, it's nice to get in and out.
if like you're trying to recommend something to somebody who say doesn't want to read 80 volumes of One Piece because they think they have to read it all in one sitting for some reason, maybe you can recommend something like Takamagahara, where it's like, has some cool action, and you can recommend it to somebody who's not like maybe super picky about the comics they read. And I know that probably makes it sound like a bad thing, but just something for somebody that maybe they're not looking for like a whole ton from something they're reading, some like a time waster, something to kind of pass the time.
If you want to read something that's fun but not necessarily great, just like a popcorn comic almost.
Yeah.
And the short comic thing definitely runs true. Like, if people were to ask me for recommendations for short manga series, this would probably be in the first 5 I recommend to them. Which, considering the amount of stuff I've read, that's actually pretty high praise.
Yeah, I could see that. Like, I honestly, Maxy, I think you did a better job of explaining my point than I did. But yeah, I would go with that. I would say, yeah, if you just want something, short but fun enough, I could recommend it. But again, it's really going to depend on. I guess this goes with any recommendation, but it's really going to depend on the person you're recommending this to. Because if you're going to recommend this to somebody who really wants a very gripping, well-told story, then no, this would not be the first thing I would go to at all.
Well, this sounds like an awful dunk after you've just said that, but I was going to say, this is probably the sort of thing I'd recommend to people who really like the fights in Bleach. Because it's got that sort of stuff, It's got like the really well-told action and then like weird asides for comedy that doesn't really work out. Like, it's got a lot in common with Bleach's action scenes.
It kind of does, actually. I could see that. But no, yeah, man, I think it's so hard to like, because I'm having to do this thing where it's like, I have so many criticisms of Takamagahara, but I'm really trying not to dunk on it too much, because again, like you were saying, with the trouble with the production of this comic in general that it apparently was having, I really don't want to dunk on it too hard, considering what was going on there.
Don't get me wrong, it's still perfectly fine to like sit down at the end of the day and say, I thought this comic was pretty bad, because even if it's got reasons to be bad, a bad comic's bad, or rather a comic you don't like isn't good, So, like,
exactly.
You're not in the wrong to dislike it for that. Don't let me, like, pressure you with my comics positivity to have to be nice about everything you read. Because that drives you insane after a while. And then you turn into me, who ends up... I'm trying to think of a funny way to say this. Okay, here's a good one. If you end up being like me, positive about all comics, you end up going crazy enough that you end up reading Erasure, a series about piss. If you want to know more about the manga about piss, you can find me on Twitter at MaxyTheB.
I almost want to just end it there and then just cut to the end of the show. But I'm not going to do that to you. That would be cruel. But no, I think we've probably exhausted everything we had to say about Takamagahara. It's a weird, short-lived series that honestly is actually pretty fun to talk about. I can't even lie. I mean, anything that I can get a podcast out of, I can't say is all bad. But no, yeah, Maxy, thank you for coming on and talking about more Cancel Jump comics with me.
Yeah, I'll happily do it anytime. I've read a lot of them.
Maxy, do you have anything to plug before we head out of here real soon?
Sure. So I mentioned it in a joke about a manga that I've read about piss, but you can find me on Twitter at MaxyTheB. I'm currently, my main thing is that I'm trying to do a thread where I'm going through all of Captain Tsubasa in the original Japanese, and that's stalled a little bit because, as it turns out, it's really hard to read, and I'm trying not to go and use Shinji's translations to help me out, mostly because I don't touch anything pirated really. But also because the older ones for the era I'm reading are wonky. I mean, Shinji's, as far as I know, he's French. Like, English isn't his first language. And so a lot of the early scans he did back in the olden days when scans weren't evil, they read awfully. They're the gibberish mostly. So I'm having to read this in Japanese. It's taking me some good time between chapters, but the thread is pinned to the top of my thing. I've gone through a lot. I'm on like the middle of volume 6 right now of these sort of big 350-page volumes. So wow. I'm making good progress. My plan is to actually have done the whole series before the year's over. Probably not going to happen, but we'll see. Beyond that, I'm also actually doing stuff on Friendship Effort Victory again. There's no real set plan. There's no dates the posts come out. It's literally just, I feel like doing something, I do it. I've done posts about what I'm reading in Japanese magazines at the moment, because the magazines are ones that people don't tend to know much about. So I've done one for Shonen Sunday, which, I mean, we know about because Bomber's in our lives, but no one else does.
Pretty much.
And for Grand Jump, which nobody talks about Grand Jump, which is a shame because it's the best Jump magazine. And I'm probably wrong about that, but I like it because in my heart, I am a mid-30s businessman.
Well, I appreciate your posts about Grand Jump, Maxy. I really appreciate I appreciate all your tweets. Really, I admit that I don't follow them very frequently. But you know, whenever I do see them, I just like that you post about the stuff you read. It just, I don't know. I just like having your tweets around because I think they are legitimately very interesting.
Yeah, that's the thing. Well, and people have really kind of latched onto my current brand of talking about all the strange things I'm reading in Japanese. Reading in quotation marks because I'm doing okay with Japanese as a language, but I'm also very wrong about most things I read. But, you know, it's been the first time in ages where, like, people have started following me on Twitter from, like, new walks of life that I never expected. So clearly there's something to this.
Apparently.
But yeah, there will be a review going up on Friendship Effort Victory for Saint-ish Show from Seven Seas, the shoujo reimagining of Saint Seiya Legends of the Zodiac. It might take me a little while to write about because it's really, really weird. But I'm excited to actually let people know about this sort of really unusual manga that exists. And I think that's all I have to plug for now.